Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. The situation for the Ukraine is near to desperate. The situation is worse than ever since the beginning of the special military operation. Zelensky and his team understand that something big is going to happen in coming days. Trump said he was preparing a big statement on Russia on July 14th. Ukraine is anxiously awaiting it. We have tried all possible options over the past few months to convince Trump that Putin does not want peace and will continue bombing Ukraine. All negotiations, I hope Trump has finally understood this. All negotiations with the Russian side have shown one thing very clearly. They are not interested in real negotiations. That was stated by pro-Ukrainian resources. At the same time, it is unclear whether Trump will go for tough sanctions against Russia. So far, he has not ruled this out, but he has not said anything specific either. Against this background, Russia is apparently preparing for a new major attack. According to sources connected to the Russian army, the Kremlin is considering an offensive plan for the second half of the summer. As for this offensive, we have additional details published by German media. Russia is preparing a mega offensive with the support of North Korean troops. The Russian General Staff presented Vladimir Putin with a plan for an offensive in the second half of the summer 2025. For this, Russians troops will be reinforced by a contingent of 30,000 North Korean soldiers, the German newspaper writes. Trump is trying to help Ukraine as much as possible. He understands, because if Ukraine lose this battle, lose this offensive operation, most likely the Russians will be able to get the river of Dnipro. So that is why Trump is going to make a very important statement today regarding Russia supply and support of Ukraine. This morning we got first insights that were published by Lindsey Graham. Graham hints at Trump's upcoming statement on Russia, asset seizures, arms to Europe, sanctions. Senator Lindsey Graham told CBS News what to expect from Trump's upcoming statement on Russia. First, he pointed to possible moves regarding Russia's frozen assets. Watch for news about the seized assets. I don't want to speak ahead of the president, but the Europeans want to cap the interest that goes to Ukraine. Treasury Secretary Bessent wants to go further. He also spoke of a plan where the US will start selling large volumes of weapons to European allies, supposedly to help Ukraine. I expect a record flow of weapons in the coming days to help Ukraine defend itself. Graham also confirmed that Congress is close to passing a sanctions package targeting countries that buy Russian oil and goods. The tariffs might not be fixed at 500% level, as earlier proposed. Trump will have authority to set them between 0 and 500%. He'll have maximum flexibility. So as we understand, the second half of summer is going to be very, very difficult for the Russian Federation, for Ukraine, for the United States of America, and for dollar itself. So the Russians are going to launch another major offensive operation with another batch of North Koreans, but we need to understand that the worst thing is not just ahead of us. The current situation on the ground is very difficult for Ukraine. So let's discuss the current situation, and first let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, Dnipropetrovsk area, and the Pokrovsk direction. When talking about the South Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk directions, the Russians just yesterday and the previous days managed to secure the villages of Mirne, Podubne, Tolstoy. Currently there are very heavy clashes for Novokhatskoye and for the settlement of Grushevskoye. Most likely today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm control over one of these settlements. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation further. We see that Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation, and we expect that in coming days we're gonna see first reports about the beginning of clashes for the settlement of Andreevka-Klivtsova. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates about very heavy clashes for the settlement of Voskresenka. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are not going to give up the settlement. At the same time, the Russians resumed their offensive operation in the area of the settlement by the name of Malinovka. We continue receiving different updates, sometimes opposite to each other. For example, some pro-Russian resources once again reported that the village of Malinovka was secured by the Russians completely. But at the same time, we got this video where we can see how Russians were attacking the concentration of Ukrainian forces with missiles in the building in the central part, which means that the central part of the settlement is under complete Ukraine control. So we're not saying that this is a fresh video, maybe this is an archived video. We don't know for sure right now, but we are waiting for additional reports either from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation or from the Group of Forces East. Now let's talk about the most important area, about the Pokrovsk agglomeration, and as you can see, another day we got the significant number of updates from the northeastern and the northern part of the settlement of this agglomeration. The most important is that the Russians established complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines that go in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory. Hundreds of drones are flying above this area, trying to destroy as much as possible, as many as possible Ukrainian vehicles and assets. So let's discuss this in details. Telling the truth, when I was watching all these videos, I was shocked. For example, this is the first video, and as you can see, this is far behind the city of Pokrovsk and much further in the western direction from the line of combat contact. In this video, we can see how Russians with FPV drones were attacking the settlement of, by the name of Mirnograd, and the settlement of Rodinska with FPV drones. So a lot of temporary deployment points and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine were attacked, the places where Ukrainians are trying to accumulate their forces and to concentrate their units. So lots of attacks, Ukrainians suffered huge losses. Another important video is coming from the settlement of Belitskaya. In this video we can see the consequences of another Russian Giran attack. As you can see, the entire micro district or block was destroyed. Most likely the Ukrainians were using this block, this residential part of the settlement of Belitska, for, let's say, military purposes, where they were producing or repairing vehicles or producing drones for the military purposes. Interesting video is coming from the settlement of Dobropolye. We will discuss this video in details. Here we can see how Russian FPV drone attack a concentration of vehicles of Ukrainian militants in the village of Dobropolye in the part of the Donetsk People's Republic temporary. So this is a video. This video shows us lots of attacks on Ukrainian vehicles, and as a result of this attack, the entire park was destroyed. Lots of military equipment as well. So the most important is that the distance between this settlement of Dobropolye and Russian positions, let's say somewhere in the vicinity of Koptiva, is around 23 kilometers. So the Russians established complete control. We don't say that this is already something like operational encirclement or a cauldron, but the Russians are very close to establish this situation. Furthermore, as you can see, we have lots of fire, lots of attacks in the northeastern part of the city of Mirnograd. In this video, we can see that the Russians were destroying these facilities. Most likely, the Russians are planning to begin offensive operation. And today, several military experts reported that the Russians have plans to attack these facilities and to attack this mine of by the name of Stakhanova from the north, from the settlement of Razina, with the purpose to establish complete control over these territories. If the Russians are able to do this, this is going to be a very big problem for the Ukrainians. But at the same time, we see that the Russians are trying to move further in the western direction, and it seems that the primary target for the Russians is to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Rodinskaya. The Russians are still very far from this settlement, but the Russians are moving there. And when summarizing everything, it seems that the main purpose of the Russians in coming days, probably coming 2 or 3 weeks, to establish complete control over this pocket. This will allow the Russians to cut the Ukrainians in the Pokrovsk agglomeration in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. The distance from this configuration between edge Russian positions would be less than 15 kilometers, which is obviously will be under complete FPV drone control, mortar control, and under control of the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group. So the battle for the Pokrovsk and Pokrovsk agglomeration has already begun. The Russians have initiatives in their hands. The Russians control the main supply lines. Probably the Russians suffer losses, but we see that these losses don't stop the Russians from additional progress on the ground. Furthermore, we have some changes. The Russians during the previous 12 hours managed to improve their positions in the village of Mirne. We have video that was published by the Ukrainian sources. In this video, video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation still haven't reported about control about the village of Mirne, so we expect that this might happen during these upcoming days. And when the Russians do this, we will adjust the map and we will maintain the line between the villages of Mykolaiivka, Mirna and Malinovka. Furthermore, according to pro-Ukrainian resources, the Russians answered the village of Boykovka, and currently there are very heavy clashes. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the entire village of Boykovka is already in the gray zone. At the same time, the Russians managed to secure this dense network of the fortifications. The pro-neutral mappers continue adjusting the map in the direction of the next mine in the vicinity of Fedorovka. We're talking about the mine Krasnolimanskaya. So the Russians are advancing, and it's not the beginning of a major offensive operation. We talk at the beginning of this video where the 30,000 North Korean soldiers, which most likely will take place in the northeastern part along the border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. At the same time, the Russians continue pressure on the territory of the city of Kostyantynivka. Most likely the Russians are going to use the same tactics. They will not attack the city of Kostyantynivka in front. They will try to outflank the settlement and to encircle. Today, several mappers and experts, as well as neutral and pro-Russian, reported that the Russians managed to secure additional square kilometers along N32 road in the direction of the settlement of Kostyantynivka. So some sources reported that these territories is already under complete Russian control. And the military experts are saying that the Russians are not going to move, let's say, to finish the battle for Yablunovka from the west in the eastern direction. The Russian experts are saying that most likely the Russians are going to move in the northern direction with the purpose to break through Ukrainian defense and to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Stepanovka. This will allow the Russians to get as close as possible to the city of Kostyantynivka, and this can lead to unpredictable consequences for Ukrainians who are currently located in the vicinity of the Kliban-Byksky pocket and Kliban-Byksky water reservoir. Furthermore, pro-Ukrainian resources confirmed Russian progress on the ground to the south of the settlement of Alexandra Kalinova. It seemed that the front line of Ukraine between the city of Pokrovsk and Kostyantynivka collapses, and we see that this process intensifies. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern directions. We have lots of interesting updates. There are very heavy clashes in the northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast. The Russians improved their positions in the area of Kamenka. Several true lines and forest belts were taken by the Russians. There are very heavy clashes on the way to Khatnia. The Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukraine edge positions, preparing themselves before the beginning of another offensive operation. But the most important updates are coming these hours from the city of Volchansk. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians managed to concentrate huge number of forces in this area, and the Russians are saying that this morning the Ukrainians began their counter-offensive operation. And as I understand, the Ukrainians this morning are trying to counter-attack the Russians with the purpose to force them to fall back from Ukrainian side of the river of Volchansk. Of Volcha. I would like to remind you that several weeks ago we got reports that the Russians crossed the river and established a very powerful and strong foothold on the Ukrainian side. As for now, without geolocations, some sources reported that the Russians secured this pocket, and now the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians managed to prepare and to concentrate up to 10 assault groups, and they were tasked to force the Russians to fall back, but the Russians are saying that they managed to discover these, let's say, assault groups and to attack them with artillery, with FABs, with FPV drones, and the Russians are saying that these 10 attack groups were completely destroyed and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. So it seems that the Russians managed to stabilize the situation, to dig in deeper in the northern parts of northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast, and most likely soon we're going to see additional updates on the ground in the city of Volchansk itself. As for the Sumy area, as we discussed, the Russians are planning to use additional 30,000 soldiers, troops, North Koreans to intensify their offensive operation. I would like to remind you that this is not the first batch. As I remember, 6,000 soldiers have already arrived. We're talking about engineers and sappers. And now the North Korea is about to send additional 30,000 soldiers. As for now, there are still very heavy clashes for the settlement of Kondratovka. The Russian sources published this video where we can see how Russians were bombing the northwestern part of Kondratovka with RBK 500 cluster rounds. So in this video we can see lots of attacks. This is it, and this video confirms that Ukrainians have control over this territory. We made small adjustments in Ukrainian favor. This territory used to be considered yesterday as a gray zone or contested area. Now we have no doubt that Ukrainians indeed managed to improve their positions. The Russians continue bombing the main positions of the armed forces of Ukraine around Kondratovka that Ukrainians used to concentrate their forces. So in this video we can see another fab attack on Ukrainian facilities, these facilities that Ukrainians use for these purposes. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation deep inside of the territory of Ukraine from the settlement of Totkina. First report about this we got yesterday. It was published by the Group of Forces North. There was a report that the Russians entered the settlement of Ryzhovka and secured several buildings. Today this information was confirmed by neutral and pro-Russian resources. This is the situation by the end of the 30th of July, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 14th of July. The Russians continue offensive, and most likely they will finish the battle until they get the settlements of Vorozhba and Belopolye. The situation, as you can see, for Ukrainians remains tense. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.